I think there's another kind of ball of wax that affects these implementations and the responsibilities around Office 365, and that is that now with all these different applications, there's a there's a new understanding of what security means, right? Because traditionally, most organizations really focus on that authentication and like user level security and network security. But the concept and the importance of content level security, like who has access to specific collaboration spaces, we talk about this in the Office 365 world, like all the MVPs. This is what we do. We talk about this stuff all day long, right? But overall, for the IT industry as a whole, telling traditional IT people like, hey, you've got to worry about this SharePoint site, right? And the content in this document library. That's like a whole new thing that organizations aren't totally set up to deal with. And people that are traditionally are familiar with SharePoint, right? And OneDrive and also Exchange, much more understanding of these things. And it kind of enters into the conversation. But for organizations that haven't had or on their IT team, maybe they don't have professionals that are so familiar with that and they're making this transition to Office 365. That's like everything in Office 365, just like you guys are saying, right? That Exchange authentication and the Active Directory stuff, you get all that stuff set up, and we started our conversation on talking about this. Once you get that set up, there's not so much maintenance anymore on all of that. It becomes about like who has access to this document, why are we using this SharePoint site, what's this team for, right? And that's like it creates this whole new IT communication dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
And
Well,
that's the maturity, right? That's the maturity of the platform and how then the the roles kind of shift and change a little bit, and how the teams grow, and how folks who have been traditionally either AD focused or exchange focused now can grow into other roles as well, right?
Mhm.
Where Office 365 is really making a lot of these things just kind of like the light switch. Hey, you need an email set up, you buy an Office 365 license, you fill out a couple of fields, have a nice day. You don't really have to worry about like the pipes getting put together, right? It's the same way that I talk a little bit about developers. Developers nowadays can probably do 75 to 80% of the work that it takes to get an infrastructure up and running for them to run their product. While that's incredibly dangerous, at least it can be done, right? We can still remember the days of just like developers had no clue when they needed Active Directory for and why and this, that, and the other. We can still remember those days. And today, it's all fairly easily. And that then goes back to saying, hey, the Exchange folks that have also migrated to do some SharePoint work, can now start to kind of take on that security role a piece, right? Because you're no longer managing how you make distribution lists. You're no longer managing, and as long as you're out of that whole hybrid environment piece, right? As long as you're natively in 365, they can now start to kind of like retool. They just want to have to do that, and that's where sometimes when I mentioned in my post as well about somebody who can keep a little bit of the egos in check, right? Where it's like, hey, we all have that niche play that we want to play, all of those years of experience that we've had, and sometimes we're just uncomfortable on taking on these new things of just like, hey, you know what, securing that content in that team, for example, to make sure that only these 5 people can see it, just kind of isn't really my thing, right? But it's like, you're also not doing much more on the Exchange side of the house. You know what I mean? So it's like it's either you either kind of grow with the platform, right? Or unfortunately, sometimes you kind of grow out of the job a little bit. So we just all have to be careful. It is a very complex situation still, even today, in kind of doing that.